Mark is a trial lawyer from Texas. He has over 25 years experience. He also holds a master's in counseling psychology. He works with individuals and couples to build intimate relationships, and he coaches attorneys and other professionals in building workplace relationships. He's a teacher at the University of Texas School of Law, an adjunct professor at Hastings, and he has served on the State Bar of Texas's disciplinary rules and professionalism committees. He's the author of Why Lawyers and the Rest of Us Lie and Engage in Other Repugnant Behaviors. Jeena Cho is a little bit late, but she'll be coming up right after Mark. I'll go ahead and tell you about Jeena. She's a bankruptcy attorney, mindfulness teacher, and author. She received her BA and JD from the University of Buffalo, and she's an instructor at USF School of Law. She helps lawyers reduce stress and anxiety while increasing productivity and focus using mindfulness. Her first book was How to Manage Your Law Office, published by LexisNexis. Her second book is The Anxious Lawyer, which will be published by the ABA in 2015. So with that, please welcome Mark, and we'll have Jeena in a few minutes.
Thank you, Alva. Haven't even learned anything yet, and I already get a big hand. What a deal. Let me ask, in the back, can you guys hear me okay? I'm never sure whether my voice is carrying in a room like this, and especially with the air conditioning, which I understand may be going off at some point. So if everybody gets too hot and people start fanning their faces, I'll understand what's going on. It's not personal. Let me begin by figuring out how to move this. Yeah, let me talk to you a little bit about my relevant background and why it's important. As a trial lawyer, I know, how many of you do trial work? Jury trials? Trial work? Good, okay. Well, you might have had a similar experience to the one that I've had, and that is when I was a much younger lawyer. I remember, when I had a lot more hair too, I remember there was a time when I would dream in the middle of the night, this dream about being in a foxhole, shooting out against an unseen enemy in the forest. Right now, I was right in the middle of the trial every time I had one of these dreams. So I was shooting out against this unseen enemy in the forest, and all of a sudden, my gun would jam. Couldn't shoot anymore, and immediately these faceless green-clad figures with bayonets would come pouring out of the forest, moving toward the top of my position, and basically getting ready to bayonet me to death about the time that I woke up in a cold sweat. That's what trial lawyering felt like to me. It felt like death. And some of you probably know what it feels like. I'm sure you know what it feels like. Be sitting in the courtroom, and the jury's been out for God knows how long. It could be an hour, it could be a week or 3 weeks. And the jury comes back in the courtroom. After there's a knock on the door, and the bailiff says, yes, we've reached the verdict, the jury's reached the verdict. The jury comes filing back into the courtroom, and all the lawyers are sitting at the table on pins and needles, waiting to hear the verdict comes. And the judge looks at the jury charge. I don't know what it's like here in California. You have individual issues. You don't have a general charge, right? You have a general charge or individual issues, special issues. What?
Both.
Both? Okay. Well, in Texas, usually special issues. I was always on the plaintiff's side, invariably. Not always, almost always. And I always remember that the answer to the first question generally told you what you needed to know. If it was yes, then the plaintiff was going to get a verdict. If it was no, then the rest of it probably didn't matter a whole lot because it was going to be bad. Well, I remember what that was like. And I remember in cases that I won, I was overcome with joy to the point of tears. In cases that I lost, I was in absolute shock and walked out of the courtroom feeling like I'd just been stabbed in the heart. Anybody else have feelings? So, being a trial lawyer, I got well acquainted with what it's like to feel pain and the temptation that people get to medicate that pain in any way they can. So I want to tell you about that appreciation. Secondly, in teaching law, It says for 11 years, actually been now 12. This was about a year old. Teaching law for 12 years. I taught a course called, Managing Differences in an Adversarial World was an undergraduate course I taught. But my law school course at Texas was called Trial Masters, Building Trial Lawyers from the Inside Out. And my course at Hastings is called Powerful Communication from the Inside Out, the Emotional Intelligence of Lawyer. And what I've learned in teaching young law students and budding lawyers is that at that age, they are incredibly frightened little rabbits. How many of you remember the days of being a frightened little rabbit? Running around, just trying to survive with your eyes on the side of your head so you could see if the prey was coming. Wondering when the next procedural mishap would occur and you'd be in a heap of trouble and trying to figure out a way to dig out of it. It certainly brought me back to those days. So that's another area of stress and trauma that young lawyers have. And now I get my counseling psychology degree, and now I see couples. I've been seeing couples for 2 years now. And what I've noticed in seeing couples is that being a couple is hard work. People have a lot of stress at home. And that's even without being a lawyer. People who aren't lawyers, they have plenty of trouble too. It's not easy. It's not easy. And so when you combine the pressures of professional practice with the rigors of just relating to another person, living in a house with you together, presumably, that's challenging. Plenty of other reasons why we sometimes get into trouble. We sometimes get pressure to do things that we don't like and to use things we shouldn't be using. I saw the extreme version of all this at Drug Court Treatment Center here in San Francisco, where I worked for about a year, 2 years ago. And I saw these poor clients who had just such difficult lives and had such powerful, painful feelings come up that it really was over-determined that they were going to use. It was really shocking that they had even survived a lot of them, and not at all surprising that they would resort to substance abuse to medicate the feelings that they had. And I've been doing coaching in law firms and career and workplace issues. The mediation I had today was two executives of a company who, from another country actually, who were really having a hard time getting along in the workplace. And I was trying to help them learn how to relate to each other rather than fight each other, which is what they had been doing. And I noticed just how painful it was and how powerful their feelings were in just trying to relate to each other. They wanted respect, they wanted to be heard, just like all of us do, natural human emotions. And constantly, each of them was not hearing the other, and each of them was not showing respect to the other, and feelings were really quite powerful. And at the end of the day, there was some healing involved. They shook hands, they vowed to work together and tried to make it work. And then they and the CEO who had been there working with me to try to help, all turned down to the bar for beer. Good sign, but taken to excess, not such a good sign. So that's another thing I've learned, and I guess that's really about all I want to say about my background and how it informs my thinking about all this. Oh, and then the book I wrote, Why Lawyers and the Rest of Us Lie and Engage in Other Repugnant Behavior. That was all about the things that we do to one another that just make life miserable. I used to do continuing education events in Texas, and it was all about collaboration and cooperation rather than just fighting all the time with opposing lawyers. And I used to always ask my colleagues a question: if you could be sure that the other lawyer would play cooperatively, would you play cooperatively too? And guess what percentage of them said, yeah, we play cooperatively, if we could be assured the other side would. Take a guess. Yell them out. What percent? What percentage? 90, 100%. 100, 40, 50. Okay, yeah, I was going to say you guys in California are a lot more optimistic, but no, it was 80%. Pretty good average. It was 80%. And And so most of us really do yearn for that lower pressure lifestyle, that more comfortable lifestyle, that more collaborative and efficient lifestyle. One of the things that I found in the work to put my book together was just how frustrated people are at all the unproductive conflict we go through. When we see people fighting over just stupid stuff, right? It's so frustrating, and it creates a lot of strong feelings. So that's another source. I'm going to let Jeena talk about her relevant background when she gets here. Well, actually, let me just tell you. Well, let me just wait, and when she gets here, she can kind of go through that. I'll let her go back, or not let her. She'll go back. But what I want to talk about today is self-destructive habits, some examples and causes, the neurobiology of stress and addictive behavior. She's going to do some wellness focus, talk about that. I'm going to talk about managing triggers and urges and making choices, that is, developing willpower and the power of habit. So that's really where we're going here. So let's begin with self-destructive habits. We're going to talk about what those are, what causes them. Plenty of things cause them. Fear of failure do. Fear of not being good enough, fear of rejection, judgment from our inner critics. Those are all kinds of things that cause self-destructive habits. But I want to give you guys some definitions which I think are important to look at. And one is vicarious trauma. And this is a kind of trauma that we can get in the law practice. I remember being in a mediation in which there was a young woman I was representing in her 30s, had 2 young children. She had had brain cancer. And the surgeon who operated on her for brain cancer left her crippled. And she had a very slow growing tumor, astrocytoma. She was operated on, and she was left a cripple, and for the few remaining years of her life, she was going to not be able to get around. She was not being able to care for her kids as well as she could have. It was just a cowboy operation, we thought. Well, we got to a mediation, and during the mediation, the doctor says to her, turns to her and says in the middle of the mediation, I don't know if you realize this or not, but I saved your life. You'd be dead right now if I hadn't taken out that tumor, but all I've been able to do basically is prolong your death, because it's going to be very soon. And I just thought you ought to know that that's what I've done for you. I've prolonged your life so that you will not die any sooner than you are. That's the first time she hears about it. And of course she's devastated, absolutely wiped out. And I'm sitting there in tears, and the mediator's sitting there in tears, and even the insurance company lawyers, the hospital, in this case, the hospital lawyers, are sitting there in tears. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about vicarious trauma, experiencing the pain of someone else. And some of us really experience the pain of other people a lot more keenly than others. And for those of us who do that, life can sometimes be more trying. So direct trauma, resulting from aggression, including manipulation, verbal assaults, just the usual stuff that lawyers do to one another. We subject ourselves to direct trauma all the time. It's just an occupational hazard. It's just something that we experience as part of what we do, particularly in litigation. Now, maybe in office practice, maybe in transactional work, not so much. How many of you are transaction lawyers primarily? Yeah. How many of you get aggressive, manipulative, verbal assaults from other lawyers? How many of you who are transaction lawyers see that? Okay. Nobody escapes. There's no place to hide. It's going to happen no matter what you are. Even when you're a judge, there are plenty of lawyers who will chew judges out. They don't even escape. And so where does that all lead? It can lead to burnout, to frustration, powerlessness, and inability to achieve work goals. Hard to get a party to be what we think is reasonable. It's the pain of dealing with our own retaliatory impulse. Because here's what happens. When that occurs, when that assault comes in, the natural reaction is go, right? is to gear up and want to fight back, want to take a swing at the SOB you did. Isn't that the normal reaction? I mean, that's the part of this that really is underneath everything else, is underneath this civil veneer that we have. And so what do? We contain it. We don't act it out. We're civilized. We don't want to let them see that they've gotten to us for sure. And second, we just want to remain civil. That's part of our ethical responsibility, is to not let our own powerful feelings get in the way of what we do for our clients. So what's the problem? Well, we're trying to hang on and repress, really, it's not just contain, it's repress these powerful retaliatory feelings. And they got to go somewhere. They got to go somewhere, because what happens is when you get that negative energy sent in your direction, we get it sent in our direction. We get it, we feel it. I can feel it full in my face when it comes at me. And when all that energy comes to us, it's got to go somewhere. You know, either it creates an equal and opposite counter reaction where we want to go after them, or we repress it. We drive it inside. How many of you have back or neck from time to time? Okay. And generally, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but generally that's as a result of containing emotions that we don't want to feel. That is, repressing emotions that we don't want to feel. So what happens is they get somatized, they get bound up in tension. They get stuck in our muscles. Usually our neck, particularly when it's something we just want to say, that we just want to tell them to go F themselves, right? We get a pain in our neck from that. See, if they just won't do what we say, if they are just absolutely impossible, often that pain is in the lower back. That's kind of our control section, where we want control, where we want to have our way. Not 100%. Generally, though, I found those things to be true. So that's what happens when we deal with that retaliatory impulse and we aren't able to act on it, because we almost never are. We almost never are. How many of you have gone to bed at night after you've dealt with another lawyer thinking, how can I get that son of a bitch tomorrow? Anybody go to bed thinking that? Yeah? Okay, that's part of it. That's all part of the syndrome. Powerful feelings. They keep us awake at night. So, I want to ask you guys, I don't expect anybody to raise their hand on the last two, by the way, but I want Oh yes, I take illegal drugs all the time, especially pot and heroin. That's whatever. Okay, so how many of you would like to manage cravings for cigarettes better? Anyone? Nope. Great. Yes, one. Okay. And how about managing cravings for amounts or types of food? And how about technology use? Texting, video games, getting on the internet? Yeah, okay. And how about alcohol? How many would like to manage alcohol a little better than you do? Yep. And caffeine. Anybody like to manage caffeine? Oh, there are a lot of hands go up for that one. Okay, how about gambling? Yeah, okay. Well, the reason I mention all that is because I want to gear the prescription. I want to gear this presentation. It is a prescription. I want to gear this presentation to the things that y'all are interested in, to the kinds of things that you have difficulty managing and may want to manage better. Because what I'm about to tell you today doesn't just apply to people who are down there in the Tenderloin that I see in the city all the time, who are drunk or stoned out of their minds, right? This talk is not for them. Okay? They're beyond this talk, way beyond this talk. This talk is for the average ordinary or average extraordinary person, as I'm sure most of you are doing what you do for a living. But it's for the average extraordinary person who would like to tone down, manage things a little bit better, and get some tools to do that. Okay? So that's what I'm hoping we can do this afternoon. All right. Yeah, we kind of talked about this, but a major substance abuse trigger really is difficult feelings that we don't know what to do with, and we don't know how to handle. And we have the urge to medicate them. We have the urge to go out and have a beer after a really long, brutal day of mediation. We have the urge to light up a cigarette because we're stressed, or have caffeine because it makes us feel better, or nicotine, or whatever it might be. Now, caffeine, nicotine may be a little different situation. That may be we're really trying to jack ourselves up so that we can get a lot of energy. That could be. But that no less, only a small part of what I'm saying today does not apply to those things. Because we're going to talk about changing habits, regardless of why those habits are the way they are. We didn't get that changed. Okay. Well, the neurobiology of addictive behavior. Two things happen in addiction, essentially. There's an urge, and there is a response to that urge. So let me ask each of you to think, can you change the thought you just had? Can you change that thought? Can you change the thought you just had? Can you change the thought you just had? How about the one you just had? Our thoughts just come pouring out of our brain before we're even conscious of them. Our thoughts are developing in neuronal firings before we're even conscious of them. It's about 8 seconds that it takes from the time your neurons start firing till the time the thought comes out of your mouth. So about 8 seconds ago, I was thinking about what I'm telling you now. But I didn't know it. But the neurons were already firing in my brain. Isn't that weird? So what does that tell us? That tells us, and it's not just true about thoughts, it's true about feelings too. What that tells us is that the urges to engage in addictive behavior are beyond our control. It's kind of weird, isn't it? I'm sitting here telling you how you can cope with addictive behavior, yet I'm telling you the urges are beyond your control. You can't stop them from happening. They're going to happen. And we'll talk a little bit more about how they happen, but essentially what goes on is this whole area down here in the midbrain, mid and lower brain. When your prefrontal cortex, which is the assessment part of your brain, the executive function, you've probably heard that, it makes assessments. Generally, it's a very basic assessment at first. It's either good or bad. It's that simple. If it's good, we want to get me some of that. If it's bad, we want to get away from that. And so that's what your prefrontal cortex is saying. Good, and when it sees bad, when it sees something good, like for me, a piece of flourless chocolate cake, when it sees good, it says to the ventral tegmental area, it says good, and the VTA begins communicating with the amygdala and the nucleus accumbens, and what's happening there is dopamine is getting created. And that dopamine is now sending signals to various parts of my body, what happens is I start salivating. I just see that piece of cake, and I start salivating. Involuntarily, I have no choice. It just happens. Kind of scary. That's what your brain's doing to you. And you've got no control. This idea of free will, illusion. At least partly. It's not totally. And I'll tell you why it's not totally in a minute. It's at least partly an illusion. So, what does that mean for us? It means that we've got these urges that are coming up. So where does the choice come in? Where does free will come in? It comes in right back here. Again, this is the prefrontal cortex. I don't know if you can see the orbital frontal cortex right behind the eyes. That's where the choice comes in. That's the part of the brain that says, wait a minute, we don't have to go for that flourless chocolate cake. We're going to regret that later. We can go do something else. We can have a few dried apricots or nuts instead. boring, but maybe it works. Not as fun as flowers with chocolate cake by any means. So that's what the prefrontal cortex does. And that's where the action is. That's where we can approach addictive behavior and change it. And I don't want to get into this. This is Jeena's, but she's talking about a precursor to this. When she gets here, she can talk about that. But how many of you heard of the Serenity Prayer? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Okay. So I'd never been told this, but it just occurred to me the brain is the progenitor of the Serenity Prayer. Why is that? It's because the things we can't change are the urges. So we got to understand, we can't change the urges. They're going to happen. We've got to take them as a reality and figure out what to do with them from there. What we can change is whether we pay attention to the urges or not, or whether we change our habit and go do something else. That's where we have the power. That's where we have the power. Okay, I'm going to pass this. Okay. So I want to talk about how to manage triggers and urges. Now, there are some things that we can do to keep urges from getting out of control. Okay, yeah, let's do this. I want each of you to close your eyes. Nobody's going to do anything to you, even though this is a room full of lawyers. It's not a room full of therapists, massage therapists or anything. Close your eyes and select your most pleasurable indulgence and see what happens when you notice that. Just imagine having the most pleasurable indulgence. Everybody had an experience? All right, what'd you notice? And things you don't have to talk about, by the way. If it was just too good. Yeah. Anybody notice any bodily changes during that? What'd you notice? Relaxation. Ah, great. You felt your body relax? Yeah, nice. Yeah, relaxation occurs when our parasympathetic nervous system takes over and it calms the body. Everything calms down. Our brain tells the rest of our body, it's cool. We don't have to worry about this. Let's just take it easy and relax. Right? Sympathetic nervous system is the one with all the adrenaline and cortisol and all the stuff that gets us jacked up. Right? So how many of you, in doing that exercise, noticed salivation? Noticed your mouth water? Anybody? Okay. You noticed relaxation change. Anybody notice any other physical changes? Yeah.
Previous question.
Oh, what was the previous
No, I
question?
wasn't asking questions. The answer is question raising my hand.
What was the hand raise about?
Relaxation. So did anyone notice any relaxation?
Got it. Okay. So you relaxed as well. Okay, cool. Anybody else notice any physical sensations? Okay. So, yeah, being a lawyer makes you a little numb sometimes. It's kind of hard to feel sometimes. You'll notice that. Another way that we cope with difficult stuff that we deal with. So anytime that we see something that is pleasurable, or even something that's associated with it, our dopamine neurons start firing and they energize us to go after it. So what happens when you think about something that you associate with it? So I can see a plate that I know chocolate cake goes on and a fork waiting for the slice. And I can get going off of that. Anybody else have that same experience? I had clients who would just walk into the Tenderloin and just smelling that Tenderloin air in San Francisco, they knew a high was on the way. Yeah, I know, it's not the same experience that we have when we smell that air. I learned that there were two rules in the Tenderloin. One, look down, and rule 2A was brown, bad, gray, good. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So what happens when you think about something, you associate it with, things start firing again. You get jazzed up about it. So that leads us to a conversation of people, places, and things, because those are the kinds of things that trigger addictive behavior. And, you know, if we want to manage our alcohol consumption, or if we want to manage our dessert consumption, if we want to manage our cigarette, one of the things that makes it hard to do that is that those things often occur in the context of social connection. So we may take a smoking break with folks at work and talk about very deep and important things. We may go out drinking with our best friends and talk about very important things, or talk about fun, or usually talk about love interest, which is really fun to talk about, so we associate all that together. We may go to places where trouble occurs. A TL, a bar, a bakery, a baseball game, wherever it might be, where we do the things that ordinarily are trouble. Jeena, what I'm thinking that we might do, if it's okay with you, is let me finish my piece, because I've left your slides out, and let you go back and just pick up.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Okay, this is Jeena, by the way. Let's give her a hand braving the tragedy. It's actually going to work out fine. Okay. So people and places and things cause dopamine to fire. When I was in drug court, I had this one client. He was absolutely adorable, the cutest little guy. You know, really conscientious. He was really trying hard. He really wanted to get sober. Really wanted to stay sober. And he said one of the things that was a problem for him is a paycheck. That was the thing that was a problem for him. His association with a paycheck was, I go out, I cash my paycheck, and I go find a prostitute. Fun. But when I find that prostitute, I also get myself high on meth, and so I get a double whammy. Oops, trouble. So one day, he's telling me that he got his paycheck and he relapsed. And he said, you know, what I did was, usually what I would do is I would call my girlfriend. He's got a girlfriend. I would call my girlfriend. Yeah, I know. This is drug court. Okay, it's not Walnut Creek. It's not Pleasant Hill. This is SF drug court, right? Okay. So he says he's all embarrassed and he's just really crying and just feeling awful. And he said, yeah, I called my girlfriend. When I called her, I was really hoping she wasn't going to be there. Because he's already got the check. The dopamine neurons are firing. He's already getting jacked up for his high and his sexual experience. And so he doesn't want his girlfriend to answer the phone because he knows if she does, he's got to deliver the check to her. So he relapses. So what did we decide to do? Direct deposit. Solves that problem. Okay? He never even has to hold the darn thing. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about with people, places, and things. To avoid the things that may be associated with the behavior that we're trying to stop. And let's talk about emotional triggers. This is probably, well, yeah, I'm going to talk about a little more, but not a whole lot. I think one of the emotional triggers is anxiety. How many of you have ever worried about something? I just want to see who's still awake, because if somebody doesn't raise their hand, they ain't here. Okay, let's see it again. How many of you have ever worried about something? Okay, great. Well, I finally got your hand up back there. Okay, great. Well, anxiety is caused by one of three things. Really simple. One, anxiety-provoking thoughts. If I get up in front of this audience and they ask me to sing, I'm going to look like an idiot. Or other negative predictions, or mind reads of people. Oh, everybody in that room is thinking I'm crazy. Everybody in that room is thinking I'm this ignorant Southern cracker. mind reads. Drive ourselves nuts with those things. And other anxiety-provoking thoughts. Second thing is uncomfortable feelings, things that we wish we didn't feel. How many of you have gotten up to give a presentation, felt a little bit of anxiety, and said to yourself, oh my God, there's that anxiety again, it's going to get really bad, and immediately it does. Anybody have that experience? A few people? Yeah. So having that uncomfortable feeling to begin with will trigger further anxiety. There are other folks certainly who get anxiety because they're having a feeling they may be drawn to something they don't want to be drawn to. They may have some sexual identity confusion. Be drawn to someone they don't want to be drawn to, and I'm going, oh, I don't want to feel that. I don't like that feeling. I'm not that. I'm really not that. Really, I'm not that. Right? So that's the second thing. The third thing is simply being on the edge of the unknown. How many of you have ever been out in the woods? How many of you have camped overnight in the woods in the dark? Yeah. Okay. So the edge of that fire is the edge of the fire light. Is the edge of the unknown for sure, because you don't know what's lurking out there. You really don't. All you know is that it feels safe and warm in your campsite, and hopefully the fire will scare the bears away. My poor wife is terrified of bears. I don't know where she got that. She's absolutely afraid of bears. You know, I had to tell her, honey, there are no bears in the Tenderloin. Not really. Not really. But being on the edge of the unknown is scary. We don't know what's going to happen next. When we go to trial, we don't know if we're going to win or lose. We may think we know. How many of you ever won a trial you thought you were going to lose? And how many of you ever lost a trial you thought you were going to win? Yeah. So we never know. Rarely, anyway. We really never really know until the verdict comes. But being on the edge of the unknown is a scary thing. It's anxiety-provoking. But there's a good part to that. The good part is that being on the edge of the unknown and having anxiety gears us up to get prepared for what we're doing. How many of you took the SAT? Right? Remember that way back when for me, not for most of y'all. When I took that SAT, I was a pretty cool test taker, but there were other people I knew who really got terribly anxious around test taking. And if they'd only known what we know now, and that is, in experiments that have been done, if you were told that your anxiety is going to be a benefit in the SAT because it's going to get you to focus, it's going to enable you to focus on the test, and you will do better if you have anxiety, you can focus that on the test. If you're just told that, that's the only difference between what your group is told and another group which is told nothing. In a laboratory setting, you score 50 points on average more than the control group scores. And when you get into a real SAT situation where it's really, where anxiety is even higher than it would be in a laboratory situation, the difference is 65 points average, which is pretty amazing. So tell all your little kiddies when they take the SAT, don't sweat the anxiety, it's going to work for you, right? So that's one way to cope with anxiety is to really recognize that when we're on the edge of the unknown, a certain amount of anxiety to the point that we can make plans and use it is good for us. So we're changing the frame around it. We're saying, wait, this is really good. We're not believing that it's bad. So we can recognize that and we can make it useful to us. And the other thing that we can do when we're on the edge of the unknown is engage our curiosity. Like, you know what? I don't know how this trial's going to come out. I really don't. What I do know is that what I'm going to do is focus on what I'm doing to do the absolute best job that I can, and the chips are going to fall where they fall. But how many of you have been told to detach from the result? That's really helpful to detach from the result, not sweat the result. Just right now. Another little technique. Don't sweat the result, just focus on the task. Just focus on the task. And things go, from my experience, a lot better. So anxiety at the edge of the unknown, anxiety because of an uncomfortable feeling, anxiety because of anxiety-provoking thoughts. The key to the first two, or the key is really to undo the thoughts, to deal with the thoughts. And the way to do that is really recognize that you cannot predict the future. You really, really don't know what's going to happen. So why torture ourselves worrying about what's going to happen when there's no way to predict what it's going to be? We can't know that when we stand up in front of a room, the audience is going to hate us. We can't know that they're going to think we're stupid. We can't know that. Because a whole lot depends on how we come across in that moment, rather than in the moment that we're thinking about what might come across. So we get present. Jeena, I'm sure we'll talk more about being present. But we get present and we recognize that, wait, let's just see how this is going to go. Let's do the best we can to see how it's going to go. So that's dealing with anxiety. I want to talk about outrage. Oh gosh, outrage. Here's a great outrage example. I was in a drug court. This young man, who himself had been a drug counselor at one point, is in a relationship with a woman, and they're driving down the highway, and he is angrier than a wet-handed her. And not only is he angry, but he is so right and she is so wrong. That's what I mean by outrage. Anger is simply this retaliatory impulse, this immediate urge to fight back. Outrage is, yeah, and I got every right to be. You're wrong and I'm right. Because when we're in outrage, we feel like we're right and they're wrong. It makes us feel good because we're so right and they are so wrong. So this guy is in a major outrage riding down the highway. And there's this woman, poor woman, his girlfriend, sitting in the front seat with him. He gets so angry that he boots her out of the car on the highway, stops, thankfully. No, the car's not moving. You know, you have the consideration to stop. He stops, lets her out, kicks her out, and proceeds to go on a 3-day bender after being sober for a number of years and totally destroying his recovery, losing his job as a counselor, and just really totally effed up his life. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about outrage. And what's really helpful about outrage is to recognize when it's about we're right and they're wrong. That's really just a defense to the original feeling of anger or irritation, which itself is probably a defense to some pain or hurt that occurred to us, some want that we didn't get satisfied, some pain that's underneath that. And if we can get down to that want and that hurt and that pain and just experience that and have it be okay to experience that and not run away from it, then we are far less tempted to go after substances. Despair and helplessness. When we experience despair, helpless, most of the time it's not rational, but when we get to that point, it's time for therapy. There's no quick cure for that typically, no quick, easy fix. It involves a real exploration of the thoughts that are around it, and an exploration of the client's history and the things that have brought them to that point. It may, in large part, have to do with relationships that they're in, because that's usually where people get to the point of helplessness. You know, no matter what I do, I cannot please her. No matter what I do, I cannot get him to understand me. Yeah. How many of you know couples like that, where the husband is going, no matter what I do, I just cannot please her. I can't figure out, I can't unlock the key. I can't unlock the door. And the wife's going, God just doesn't have a clue. He does not get where I am. Doesn't get what I need, where I'm coming from. Anybody know couples like that? Yeah. Not surprising. Very common. And so when we get to that sort of helpless place, it's time to get help. Depression. Depression generally, sometimes it's congenital, sometimes people have it all their lives. Sometimes it's a result of neurotransmitter imbalances. But maybe 80% of the time, according to one study I read at least, depression has to do with the fact that folks turn anger inwardly. That is, it's not safe to turn the anger outwardly. It's not safe to really feel it. And so we turn it in, we blame ourselves. God, if only I'd asked that last question, I wouldn't have lost that case. If only I'd done this, if only I'd done that. Oh, I'm so depressed. I'm just such a screw up. I'll never be a decent trial lawyer. You know, that sort of anger toward them turned inward. So the first thing to do is to recognize that that's what we're doing, and find a way to turn it out, to target it outward. Could be the situation. You know, I did the best I could. This was a hard case. You know, things I might have done differently, but I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to learn from this. And I would do it differently next time. But I did the best I could. And just because it didn't go like I wanted doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. Other than I've got something to learn, like every human being on the planet does. This is all about learning and growing. So, depression often requires professional help, but sometimes we can do something about it ourselves. In fact, sometimes we notice when that depression starts and can actually identify the anger that we turned inwardly. I noticed one time when my wife was out of town for quite a while. She actually moved out here before I did, from Austin, Texas. And I remember one of the things we used to do was go to the Whole Food Mothership in Austin, which is this amazing store. It's like 80,000 square foot, about 15 restaurants in it, and you know, a cornucopia of temptation. It's kind of like that ferry building farmers market on a Saturday morning in San Francisco, but in a store and with a whole lot of restaurants and a whole lot of temptation. And one of the things my wife and I used to love to do on a Sunday morning was go down there together. And I found myself on a Sunday morning going down there, going down there, let me just say that much. About 3 or 4 days later, I was in a workshop and I was feeling depressed. And so part of the workshop was to undo the depression. And somebody said, well, you know, when did you first get depressed? And I said, oh, you know what? It was when I was in Whole Foods Sunday. And what I realized was that I had that anger toward her because she wasn't there. It wasn't her fault. But she wasn't there. And I wanted her there. I wasn't getting what I wanted, so I was angry. I was frustrated. I wanted to see her. And what I did with that is not express it to anyone. I didn't say it to her because it wasn't her fault. I didn't want to tell her I was angry with her or blame her for anything. And so I sort of turned it inwardly on myself and got depressed. And then I was able later to call, once I realized that, to call her and say, you know, I realized I was really pissed off at you Sunday morning. I really was. And, I'll be back there smiling. Because you know what this is like, right? Yeah. And she was going, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I wish I could have been there with you. You know, it was a really nice little moment we had. But the point of all that is that we can deal with some milder forms of depression by recognizing that we're turning our anger inward and finding a way to deal with anger. One of the ways of dealing with anger that I found is to not repress it, but to contain it and explore it. How many of you think that all the other drivers on the road that get in your way, like I do, are morons? Right? Anybody gets in my way is a damn moron. Right? I get so frustrated with them. And so I'm driving down the highway after getting a little educated about feelings. I didn't always know about feelings. I can tell you a story about that. But anyway, we're driving down the highway, and so of course some moron cuts me off. That's the voice going off in my head. And I'm going, argh! You know, my knuckles are getting white, and I'm grabbing the steering wheel, and I'm just really, really, really feeling it. And then I realize, okay, feel that anger. Just feel it. And I'm going, it's going throughout my body, and I'm getting all puffed up, and it's going, yeah, I really feel the power of this. This is cool. And I realized that it was and I started laughing at myself, how silly I was doing all that. But I realized that just exploring the anger and containing it without honking my horn or ramming his rear bumper or any of that stuff, I recognized that just feeling it and containing it just made it a pleasant experience. And I want to commend that technique to you. Whenever you feel that kind of anger, frustration, that raw anger, just notice what it feels like in your body if you don't tamp it down, if you get the power of it and the joy of it, because it's a leftover from when our amygdala is giving us fight hormones. We've got fight hormones. We're getting ready to fight, but of course in today's civilized society, we don't go do that. We don't go out and shoot people with guns. We get mad at them. We file lawsuits instead, right? And our lawyers, who will figuratively shoot them and get shot at ourselves. But if we can experience the feelings, then, life's advantage. It's actually kind of fun. So that's a suggestion on dealing with anger, coping with anger. I think, Jeena, you've got a half hour, don't you? Yeah. I think I'm going to stop. Let me just make sure there's nothing. Yeah. Oh, I just want to say one quick thing about this. Developing habits. There's a cue that you get, like a cue that, like that slab of chocolate cake. That's a cue, right? And there's a routine that I used to follow when I'd see that slab of flawless chocolate cake, which was go eat it. And there was that was the routine, and there was a reward, right? And so that habit caused cravings to take place. And so, there was this reason that bottom cartoon is there is selling toothpaste. They discovered that the cue is feeling the film on your teeth. After a long day, you can run your tongue along your teeth and you feel the film. That's a cue. So they encourage people to feel that this is Pepsi, way back then. And then brush your teeth, that's the routine. And the reward is, your teeth feel good and you got this fresh smelling breath. And not only that, you have this sudsy stuff in your mouth that's kind of exhilarating because it's tingly and everything like that. And so by getting you to get triggered by the cue and substituting a toothbrush and having you brush your teeth and thereby giving you a reward, they created a habit. So what happens is when you get a cue by seeing this slab of chocolate cake and you eat it and it's lovely and you get all jazzed up because it feels so good and tastes so good, then you get your reward, and that's a habit. Every time you see the cue, the picture of the chocolate cake, the plate, the fork, you want it, and you want to do the same thing over and over again. But what they found is you really couldn't control things very well if you just tried to get rid of the reward, if you just tried to get rid of the routine. You had to replace the routine with something else. And so that's why instead of chocolate cake, I eat dried apricots or nuts. So one way to change a habit is to automatically start doing a new routine, adopt a new routine. I mean, now I even salivate when I think about dried apricots, believe it or not. I really do. Even more so than the chocolate cake, because I've had them a lot more recently than I've had that. I don't even remember what that was like. But I remember dried apricots. Turkish, especially. Those are really good. Okay. Well, and the point I'm going to make here, anybody know who won the 2006 Super Bowl? This is the last thing I'll do. Yeah, please.
Steelers.
Who?
Steelers.
Indianapolis Colts. Tony Dungy. I think. I'm pretty sure that's right. And the whole point of this is what he did was his players would think. And what he did, instead of letting them think when they got on the field, was gave them a habit that was absolutely automatic to them, so that they were a half a step of the opposition. So that when the ball got snapped, they went to a certain place. That's just what they did. They just headed to this place. Really simple. Don't think, go. Right? That's what they were told to do. And once they believed what he was saying, they began to start winning. In some big games, they forget the habit because they didn't trust it, and they would fall apart. But once they got back into that habit, they did really, really well. So I commend to you the idea of changing habits. Focus on changing the routine. Believe change is possible. Group support, by the way, helps establish that. Community support helps prevent relapse. So you get a bunch of people who want to quit smoking cigarettes, reduce caffeine, reduce alcohol, whatever it might be. You get a bunch of people working with you together and hold each other accountable. That's another way to help it. Anyway, you guys have been a great audience. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. And here's Jeena.
Hi, everyone.
Hey,
Hi. I couldn't help notice the irony of riding down the highway from San Francisco with my white knuckles trying to get here on time when I'm going to teach a stress reduction mindfulness class. To start, I wanted to just share some statistics with you, and I'm sure you guys have all sat through these CLEs. But in general, I don't think I'm breaking any news by saying that lawyers are a group of very unhappy folks. So lawyers are fourth among professions with the highest suicide rate. 40% of law school graduates are suffering from depression by the time they graduate, so we kind of start from young. 7 out of 10 lawyers said that they would change careers if they could. Anyone relate to that if you could switch careers? And that lawyers suffer from depression at twice the rate of the general population. So out of the 1.2 million lawyers, about 240,000 of them are clinically depressed. And I share the statistics with you not to make anyone feel even worse about it, but because if there was some sort of a disease that was targeting just lawyers and making us suffer in this way, all of us would be up in arms and demanding some sort of a cure, right? And we just sort of listen to these statistics and go, oh yeah, well, 240,000 attorneys are clinically depressed and moving right along, they're committing suicide, they're abusing substances, and we just wonder about, well, why is it that we accept this, and why is it that that's the case? And certainly our profession sort of encourages this, right? We are all expected to produce a certain outcome, yet we have so little control over how a case is going to go. So let's just think about a typical litigation case, right? So you have no control over the judge, you have no control over the case law, you have no control over the facts, you have no control over the opposing counsel or their clients. And sometimes, maybe if you get really lucky, you have control over your own client. So, maybe in any given case, you have control over some very small percentage of the case. If you had to guess, maybe 10, 20% if we're lucky. Yet somehow we're expected to deliver the exact results. And we wonder, no wonder why we're stressed. So I am certainly no exception. I'm writing a book for the American Bar Association called The Anxious Lawyer. And when I tell people I'm writing a book titled The Anxious Lawyer, they kind of give me a puzzled look and they're like, oh, so when I tell a non-lawyer that, they all want to tell me about the anxious lawyer that they know in their life. And when I tell a lawyer that I'm writing a book about anxious lawyer, typically the question I get is, well, that sounds interesting, what is it all about and why are you writing a book on it? So I wouldn't say that I was really ever depressed or anxious, except that I was, and I probably didn't even recognize it. So I would suffer from stomach aches and back aches and headaches on a pretty regular basis. I would have very frequent insomnia, and I got really good at sort of managing all of these physical symptoms. There's medication for all of those things. You go to the doctor and say, I have a stomach ache, and they give you a pill for it. You have a headache, same thing. And about 4 years ago, I was planning my wedding, and I think that was a thing that broke the camel's back. If you ever plan the wedding, you know the extra stress that causes on your life. And I started losing clumps of hair. Not just a little bit of hair, but clumps of hair. So of course I ran running to a doctor. He ran every test and said, Jeena, there's nothing physically wrong with you. It's all in your head. And so he sent me to a psychiatrist who proceeded to prescribe me even more pills. And I thought, I probably have like another 30 years of law career ahead of me, and I can't continue to function in this way. So I really started to look at my life and try to figure out, well, what is it that's causing all this anxiety and all this stress without even me really being cognizant of it in many ways. And a good friend of mine told me about this program. It's called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, MBSR. Anyone familiar with the word mindfulness and the whole treatment program? Is completely science-based. It's by a scientist called John Kabat-Zinn from the University of Massachusetts. And she said, you have to go take this class. And it was being offered at Stanford. They teach it to everyone from first year undergrads to the MBAs and the medical students. So I thought, well, they're teaching it at Stanford, right? There has to be some legitimacy to it. So I went and I took the 8-week class, and it really sort of transformed my life. And when I talk about mindfulness, it's all kind of similar to what Mark was talking about. It's being in the present moment without judgment or preference. So when I'm stuck in traffic, driving over here, being like, oh my gosh, I'm half an hour late to a presentation and there are people waiting for me, I can have a meltdown, I can have a freak out, but that's not going to change what's happening in the present moment, which is that I am stuck in traffic and I am running late and there's nothing I can do about it. The only thing I can do is focus driving carefully so that I can show up and do my best and do my presentation. But we all have this tendency to want things to be exactly the way we want it, and we get angry about it if we don't get exactly the way things that we think it should be. Right? How many of you guys can relate to that? Like, you want things, yeah, of course, right? All of us, of course, just human nature. So when I was going through the MBSR program, I started to learn a lot more about stress and stress response and what that looks like. So I'm curious, when you're under stress, what do you notice in your body? What happens in your body when you're undergoing stress, when you're in a stressful situation? Anyone?
Anxiety.
Anxiety, yeah, or what else do you notice?
Sleeplessness.
Sleeplessness, yeah.
Sweating or like
Sweating.
overheating.
Yeah, or how about tension? Do you notice any tension in your shoulders? Maybe your shoulders tense up. Maybe you notice some extra energy running through your arms and your legs, maybe. Maybe your stomach tightens up, right? And your heart's beating faster. So all of these things are the fight or flight response, which I'm sure Mark discussed. And the fight or flight response is great if a saber-toothed tiger were to jump into this room and try to attack you. That's a great response. But it's not such a great response when you're having a conversation with your opposing counsel, right? Because the part of your brain that you want to engage is your prefrontal cortex. So if you think about the brain sort of from an evolutionary perspective, right? First we have the brainstem, and then our brain started to develop from backwards and then forward. So the prefrontal cortex is sort of the new kid on the block and is responsible for executive functioning. So when you're doing difficult legal work or when you're engaging in conversation with your opposing counsel, or that's when you want your prefrontal cortex to be in charge, and that can't happen if your amygdala and your hypothalamus, which is in the back of your brain, is going, I am going to die. But that's what the fight or flight response is this response that says, I am going to die, and that's why my heart's pumping faster, stopping digestion, I'm noticing tenseness in my body, or you notice the sweatiness, and all of that. So what are some ways to and so I've sat through a lot of these substance abuse prevention classes, and the thing that always kind of struck me is they always tell you that you shouldn't abuse substance, right? You shouldn't do crack cocaine, you shouldn't abuse alcohol. But they don't really tell you ways in which you can manage your stress and anxiety better so you don't develop those habits. So I'd like to just go over some very practical ways in which you can manage your stress and anxiety and actually focus on wellness. I mean, let's not talk about the sort of the bottom, like focusing on substance abuse. Let's talk about actually maintaining wellness and how we can become happier in our profession. So I love this quote: secure your own oxygen mask before helping others. I think as lawyers, we are so good at taking on other people's problems, right? We adopt our clients' problems as our own. How many of you guys woke up in the middle of the night thinking about a client's problem? Yeah. Or woke up in the morning and that's the first thing that pops into your head, right? I used to jokingly tell people that I started going through the MBSR training program because I got tired of showering with my clients. Like I'd hop in the shower in the morning, I'd be shampooing my hair, and I'd be like, "Oh, I can't believe he did that," And there's this feeling like you're always trying to help other people, but we never take care of ourselves. We never really pay attention to what are we eating. How many of you guys eat lunch at your desk on a regular basis? Yeah, I mean, almost like all of you. And if you were to really consider for a moment, what would be the most kind way you can take care of yourself, right? It would be to actually eat your meals and to eat your meals with a little bit of mindfulness. Like, what does this food taste like and what is this doing for my body? Or when you're showering in the morning, you would shower without thinking about the million and one things that you have to do. So that's sort of the foundation of mindfulness. And mindfulness has been just sort of a buzzword everywhere. There was a Time magazine article about it. And that's the topic of my book, The Anxious Lawyer. So the importance of self-care, and it doesn't have to be anything long. You can literally just spend like a minute a day just noticing like what is going on in my body, how do I feel, and just paying attention to your life instead of having your mind always be in the past or in the future or in some other place except right here. And then there's also this sort of confusion, but versus self-care versus being selfish. So a lot of people think they're the same thing. If you are taking care of yourself, you are then being selfish. And of course, God forbid we do anything that's selfish. But they're actually the opposite, right? Self-care allows you to take better care of yourself so that you can take better care of others. Being selfish implies that you are only doing it for the purposes of your own selfish gain. So it's really important to take care of yourself before you take care of others. So ways of letting go of worry, stress, and anxiety. And these are like 7 little tips that I use on a regular basis, which really helps me reduce stress and anxiety. And the other thing is it will actually help increase focus and productivity. So the first one is, where is your attention? Is it in the past or in the future or in the present? So when you're writing a memo or writing an email to your opposing counsel or whatever, how many of you has had that experience when you're in the middle of doing something and you kind of go, oh, it's been like half an hour and I have no idea what, and your mind is just completely checked out and you're thinking about that hearing later that day or something that the judge did yesterday, right? So if you can remember to bring yourself back to what's happening right now, that will not only help you reduce stress and anxiety, but it will help you become more productive. So what does it mean to be in the present moment? So we can practice this right now. So you're all sitting in this conference room, right? And what do you notice? What's just some of the things that you are noticing in the present moment right now?
It's cold.
Yeah, it is cold in here. Yeah.
to work. The button's broken, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's cold in here. There's, other lawyers around you. Obviously, you're listening to the sound of my voice. We're sitting in this room with fluorescent light. There's all these sort of details about being in the present moment that you can notice. And the interesting thing about being in the present moment is that they've done a lot of research around cultivating happiness. So if you go on Amazon and just look on their books and type in the word happiness, last I checked, there were about 48 titles with that word happiness. So there's like volumes of research being done on happiness. And so what the science shows is that the way to become happier, it's not so much winning the big lotto, winning the big case. Like we think about getting happier as like these huge events, right? But they're actually smaller things, and by bringing yourself into the present moment, you can actually make yourself happier. So we're all sort of born with this sort of baseline of happiness. You know, if you're always like a 6 on your happiness scale, that's pretty much where you're going to be, and that's what the scientists thought for a really long time. But what now we know is that you can actually elevate your baseline of happiness by cultivating present moment awareness. So just doing something very simple on a day-to-day basis with intention and actually paying attention to what you're doing. So for example, tying your kids' shoes mindfully day after day, or reading them that bedtime story with intention instead of like, come on, let's get through this book. So I have 10 other things to do. I have to finish my motion, and just like noticing, or when you're engaging with someone, when you're having a conversation with someone, really just noticing that person. Like, wow, what is that person feeling? What is that person saying? And also noticing what's happening within yourself, right? Is what that person's saying, is it making my stomach kind of tighten, or am I noticing, my shoulders hunching? And these are all great information and clues that's giving you information about what's happening in that moment. And as lawyers, we have this tendency to just live in this part of our body. Right? I had a friend joke to me that she thought for the longest time that her body was there to carry her head around, and we just kind of forget that there is a whole body attached to our head. But how many of you had that experience where you feel like someone like punched you in the gut, right? Like that's those are clues that your body is giving you. So that's actually the second point, is how does it show up in your body? So sometimes we have these experiences where you just kind of wake up, like you're having a conversation with someone, and all of a sudden you're just like furious, or you're so angry and you can't even put words around it, and you're like, whoa, where did that anger come from? And it didn't just show up out of nowhere. That anger was sort of building for some period of time. And it's just noticing it, and your body is really the first place where you'll start to notice that maybe your heart starts beating faster, or you start noticing tensing up of the muscles. And if you can start to become a little more aware of what's going on in your body, then you'll have less of those experiences where you're sort of like raging angry and you don't know how to process it. And the third tip is to move a muscle, change a thought. So I think because we're all lawyers, we like to think about things analytically, and when we're feeling anxiety, our brain thinks, I am feeling anxious, there must be something wrong, there must be a cause for this. So we go down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out what is causing this anxiety. But there may not necessarily be a particular cause, right, for causing the anxiety. And this is something I really encourage everyone to try. Like, when you're feeling super anxious, like you've been sitting at your desk for 6 hours and you haven't taken a bathroom break or a water break, like get up from your desk and walk down the hall or walk around the block and see if that doesn't change your mindset. It really will. Your mind will go from feeling really cranky or upset to actually feeling better. Writing your worries is another great tip. So for those of you that suffer from insomnia, I know I was like a chronic insomnia sufferer. I actually had a little journal on my nightstand, and it was my worry journal. And so when I couldn't fall asleep, I would write down all the things that I was worrying about, and then I would just say, all right, now it's time for sleep. I wrote down everything that I can possibly worry about, and once I sort of exhausted all the things that I was worried about, I was able to fall asleep. And going back to the basics, so eating 3 healthy meals, getting regular exercise, all of those things, eliminating caffeine from your diet, all of those things that we all know we should be doing, but we're not. So going back to self-care. And breathe, and breathe. So breathing, well, you can't live without it, right? Your breath is always with you. And so when you notice that if there's a quality of your breath that's intimately linked to how you're feeling. So if you're breathing like this, that's not going to make you feel very good, right? Not for very long anyway. But if you can just slow down your breath, that old saying like count to 10 before you say something, it all has to do with the breath awareness. So if you can just remember to breathe when you're feeling anxious or stressed, I'd like to recommend that you literally set the timer for 1 minute for 60 seconds and see if you can take 3 really long inhale and exhale. That'll take you about a minute. If your body's kind of on a higher drive, you'll probably take 6 plus 10 breaths. So you just see if you can just slow yourself down a little bit by just setting your timer for 1 minute and just taking a breath. And finally, reframing and letting go of labeling. So a lot of times, as lawyers, we like to think about things how we want to think about it. Right? The opposing counsel is doing it because he's a jerk, or whatever our thought process is. But just letting go of that labeling and opening yourself to the opportunity that there may be a different interpretation, that there may be some other angle that you have missed, and just allowing room for that. And so, as my final tip for managing stress and anxiety, I like to just give you, and if this isn't in the handouts, I apologize, but I'll probably write it on the board. So when you're in one of those moments where you're just feeling like you're spiraling out of control, if you can just remember to do these 4 things, I guarantee you, I can't say you'll go to toward complete Zen state, but it will definitely bring your anxiety and stress level down a lot. So the acronym is STOP, and the S stands for stop. So however you're feeling, whatever is happening, just stop for a second and then take a breath, or 2, or 3, or 4, as many as you need until you kind of feel like, okay, I'm back to kind of where I need to be. And then observe. So you can observe a lot of things. You can observe what's going on inside of you, how you're feeling, what your emotional state is, what you're thinking. And then you can also notice what's happening with the person that you're engaging with. Often when we're having these very stressful and anxiety-provoking experiences, we're in a relationship with somebody else. You might notice what's happening for that person in this moment. If I'm completely angry and frustrated, how is that person feeling? And you might notice maybe his face is turning really red, or he's actually curling up his fist, or just observing whatever is happening around you. And finally, P is for proceeding mindfully. So mindfulness, the way I like to describe it, is that brief pause between reaction and response. Right? All of us have these knee-jerk reactions. Something happens and you respond immediately. If you can just insert that millisecond of pause and then actually thoughtfully respond to what's going on in the moment, that will make such a huge difference in your law practice. So I have 3 minutes, and if it would be okay, I'd like to just spend literally 1 minute actually practicing just doing some very gentle breathing exercises and see if that makes a difference. Would that be okay with everyone if we just took like 1 minute? All right. So maybe you can just write on your piece of paper how stressed you are right now on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being pretty darn stressed and 1 being like, I'm really not stressed and I'm really happy right now. And we'll do an after. All right, so there's basically 4 steps in doing the breathing exercises. You want to make sure that both feet are firmly on the ground. So if you have your legs crossed, you can unfold them. And you want to just make sure that your back is in a natural and comfortable position. You might want to roll your shoulders back because we all sit like this all day. So rolling your shoulders back. And you can allow your eyes to close. And when you close your eyes, it's probably the first time you close your eyes since you got up this morning. So just noticing, what does that feel like to sit in this room with your eyes closed? You might notice that your mind feels really busy, or perhaps feels a little relaxed. But no matter whatever you're feeling in this moment, perfectly fine. And now let's bring our attention to our breath. So you've been breathing all day long from the moment that you were born, probably from the moment before you were born. And how many of these breaths do you take with intention? So let's take 3 breaths together, breathing in and breathing out long. Breathing in, breathing out long. Breathing in and breathing out long. And you can begin to move your fingers and toes and move in any way that feels good to you for your body, and allow your eyes to open. So, want to jot down where your stress level is now. How many of you noticed a decrease in your stress level? Yeah, like 80% of you. So yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you that you don't need to spend hours and hours and hours to decrease your stress. You can do these very, very simple exercises. If you just go on the App Store and type in anything like mindfulness, meditation, there are hundreds of these apps out there, and a lot of them will have 1 minute breathing exercises, just like the one that I walked you through. So that yeah.
You know, I just noticed, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that you have some meditation exercises, I think, on the website.
Yes.
Right? I did a 0.1 meditation. I think that's what you call it. You might
Yeah.
mention that website.
Yes, thank you. So my website is called theanxiouslawyer.com, and I have a whole series of 0.1 mindfulness meditation exercises. So I have ones that are themed around things like difficult conversation with an opposing counsel. So you can spend literally 6 minutes. Don't ask me if you can bill it to your clients or not. You can decide. Or having difficult conversations with your clients, or painful conversations with your clients. And so there's different themes around it. Or there's one called when you're having a bad day. Like if you're just really having a bad day, you can just spend 6 minutes. Yes, Mark.
Tell them about the workshop that we're doing.
Oh, yes. So Mark and I offer an 8-week mindfulness for meditation class. There's 3 CLEs that's part of that class. The class is starting this Thursday. And then Mark and I are partnering up, and he's doing a 2-week series on moving the room, which is all about combining the mindfulness techniques and trial techniques to become a better trial advocate. That's it. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thank you.